Okay, so it's 12 o'clock, eyes me, asses down, lots to cover. We do in fact have a lot to go over today. I've been trying lately to keep my videos, kind of in the neighborhood of 10, maybe 15 minutes, but we might even have to go longer today. So let's get cracking. This is Office Hours with the Professor, the show where I say things. Today, we're going to talk about China's first dynasty, known as the Xia Dynasty. So last time we talked about the Chinese flood myth and how it symbolizes the historical consciousness shift from the hunting and gathering kind of a big man society, or maybe a horticultural big man society of the past, to the intensive agricultural stratified society of the present day. And according to the story, there's this terrible flood, right, that spread over the earth, and the previous society was utterly destroyed. Now that's where one of my historical Chinese bros comes in. And if you're a faithful viewer, of course you already know about this guy. My man Da Yu. Da Yu, you know who? That's how we do. Yeah. So Da Yu, all right, or in Chinese, or in English, sorry, Yu the Great, all right? So, I talk about him in another video, and you should check it out if you haven't, because Da Yu kicks ass. He's awesome. Here's the short version, okay? Having worked tirelessly under the former ruler to stem this ceaseless flow of floodwaters that's just covering the land, he was chosen as the heir to the throne. Okay, so he assumed the throne in non-hereditary succession. However, having assumed power, he passed his throne along to his son, thus establishing a dynasty. Now, as king, Da Yu kept at his work until at last all of the floodwaters were tamed. Okay? And he was remembered through the ages for his diligence and his dedication, such that he was later described by Confucius as this perfect enlightened sage king. Okay? And as I say, he founded an actual hereditary dynasty, that is the Xia. Okay? So that said, however, Da Yu is very much a mythical figure. All right? I doubt very much that there was actually a guy named Yu who was in charge of stopping the floods. All right, I highly doubt that. He's very much a mythical figure rather than a historical one. For one thing, he lived hundreds of years before history, as defined by modern scholarship, that is contemporary written documentation, emerged in China. Okay, so Da Yu lived about 4,000 years ago, or 4 all right? And even then, written history did not emerge until the 13th century BC in China, okay? So, it's highly unlikely that Da Yu was a historical figure, okay? Probably mythological. And even then, especially given that the very earliest 13th century BC written documents contain no mention either of Da Yu or of the Xia Dynasty, or even of the flood myth. Okay, and that's a big hole that's missing from that's a big pothole in the road of Chinese history right now. Okay. In fact, we don't even hear about Da Yu or the Xia or the flood at all until 1,000 years later during what's called the Zhou Dynasty. Okay, until the Zhou Dynasty, which was founded in 1046 BC, we hear nothing at all about Da Yu or the Xia. Okay, so that's a big mystery. Therefore, it seems more likely to me that Dayu was a mythical culture hero, maybe somehow associated with water, maybe some sort of water spirit, maybe a dragon, than a real man. Okay, so regardless of Dayu's historicity, I would posit that it is more important to discuss the figure of Dayu, the way he would be remembered, and that memory's influence on Chinese culture. Even if he himself did not exist, as I always say, he may as well have. Okay, the same is true for the Xia Dynasty. Now, what is certain is that sometime around this period, sometime around 4,000 years ago, nascent Chinese civilization, okay, had reached a turning point, a big turning point. All right, and around this time, around 4,000 years ago, okay, there's this Longshan culture that existed in the Yellow River Basin. Go back a video if you need to remember about the Longshan, okay? The Longshan culture, which existed from 5 to 4 Xia, suddenly vanished, okay? So this culture that had existed, the civilization that had existed for a millennium suddenly vanished. It mysteriously collapsed, and some sudden natural or social upheaval occurred, which, in folk memory, may have been conflated with the changing climate at the time into the flood myth. All right. Now, urban centers emptied seemingly overnight, or at least they drastically shrank. But at the same time, again around 4 Xia, all right, around 4,000 years ago, a new urban center emerged to the south. A new urban center emerged at what is now Arlito, in central China's Henan province. Okay, so here's our China. Okay, and remember, here's our Yellow River, right? So maybe the Longshan culture would have been around here somewhere. The Arlito culture is down in here, okay? So just a little bit to the south emerges what we now know today as the Arlito culture from Henan province, okay? Now, the Arlito culture, all right, appears to be, from judging by the pottery and some of the artifacts we found, it appears to be related to, or at least influenced by, Longshan. So, the hypothesis is Longshan gave rise to, or at least influenced, Arlito culture. Okay? So Longshan, 5 to 4 Xia. Arlito existed around 4 Xia. Okay? Now, another extremely important development occurred during this time. The emergence of kingship. Chinese kings didn't really have crowns like that. They had crowns that looked more like mortarboards, I guess. Let's try to draw a Chinese crown. Here we go. Here we go. Something like that. Yeah. The emergence of kingship. Okay. And basically what we're seeing is archaeologists in the year 2011 who were excavating at Arlito in archaeologists 2011 AD, not BC, but archaeologists in the present day, 2011, are excavating at Arlito, and they discovered this sprawling palace complex at Arlito that seems to indicate that around this time one of these big men that we've talked about got bigger, and he made himself into what we'd call a king. There was at some point one big man who achieved hegemony and made himself into something new, a position maintained not by gift giving, but by coercion. So maybe our king here needs move, China. Battle axe, right? His position is maintained not by giving gifts and throwing cool parties, but by making people do what he tells them, okay? And to this day, the written symbol, okay, remember Hanzi, right? Hanzi is a Chinese written symbol for king. This is the Hanzi for king, or Wang. Okay, Wang. This is the word for king, all right? And this symbol is really just a pictogram of a battle axe, which should tell you a little bit about how these guys maintained their power. And not only did these badass kings have axes, but these axes were made of something new. Bronze. Bronze. This was a new material, and it was a material that the rulers of the early Tao culture seemed to consider central to, and perhaps symbolic of, their regime. This importance is evidenced by the presence of what appears to be a bronze foundry just south of the Arlito Palace complex in the middle of the capital city. Bronze would continue to play a central role in Chinese ritual culture, even to the present day. If you ever go to a Chinese temple, you will see offerings placed into these beautiful bronze cauldrons, which is a direct continuation of the Arlito's practices. Pretty cool, huh? Another interesting thing about the Arlito culture is that its boundaries more or less match up with those of what were given for the Xia Dynasty. Okay, the kids outside, hi! Okay, what were given for the Xia Dynasty. So maybe I shouldn't have erased our China. Here's our China again. And Yellow River. Oh, sorry. Okay, here's our Yellow River. Both the Arlito and the Xia Dynasty. So the archaeological Arlito culture and the historically described Xia Dynasty match up to the same geographical area. Very interesting. This, coupled with the presence of what appears to be a royal palace, okay, suggests what? It seems to imply, and you almost don't want to say it because it's such a big deal, that the Xia were not legendary, that they did in fact exist, and that Arlito was their capital, or at the very least, that the Arlito culture would later be remembered as the Xia Dynasty. Wow! But ultimately, due to the absence of written documents, this is the really important one, due to the absence of written documents from the Arlito culture, we just can't be sure. Were these rulers, in fact, the Xia Dynasty? Or were they someone else? Did they even speak Chinese? We may never know. The most frustrating thing about this lack of written evidence is that it probably did exist, but it just doesn't anymore. I say this because the very earliest written Chinese that we have is from the, like I say, the 13th, maybe 14th century BC, which is really only a few centuries after Arlito. However, the writing from this time period is a fully mature script, and that sort of thing usually doesn't just happen overnight, okay? So we're talking 14th, 13th century BC, and we're looking at a fully developed script. A fully developed writing system was in place by the late 14th, early 13th century BC. Okay? Now, like I say, these things take time. So what's probable is that this writing system existed in some form. It probably underwent at least a few centuries of evolution before our oldest documents were found. It had to have existed earlier. It had to have. And honestly, the probability is that this writing system developed at the Arlito culture. Okay? At least that's the most likely development. Another reason that I strongly suggest the Arlito civilization was literate is because of the accuracy of later records, okay? And there's a Chinese history classic here, okay, that was written around the 3rd, 4th century BC called the Bamboo Annals. Okay, the Bamboo Annals. And the Bamboo Annals contain a list of Xia kings along with those of the immediately succeeding Shang Dynasty. Okay, so the Xia Dynasty was succeeded by the Shang Dynasty. And the Bamboo Annals contain a list of Xia and Shang kings, okay? Incredibly, the dates and the names of the Shang kings match up quite well with the names and dates given in the annals, okay? So the Bamboo Annals had to have had an earlier source if it was going to have accurate records of the Shang kings, and we know these records are accurate because we've recovered Shang documents. All right, so this is 14th century, 13th century. So the Bamboo Annals accurately recorded the Shang kings. So it had to have had an earlier source. Okay? Now the Xia was just a few centuries prior to this. It doesn't seem completely unreasonable that the Bamboo Annals accurately list the Xia kings as well as those of the Shang. This would imply that somewhere down the line was a primary or at least near primary source. So, what happened? Where did these ancient sources disappear to? There are a few ways we can answer this question. The first and most probable is that the original documents were written on bamboo. In ancient China, ancient China, we would do our writing on these little slips of bamboo, and we would bind them together in kind of a scroll, okay? And the problem with bamboo is what? It decomposes. Organic material does not last long in the warm and damp climate of eastern China. Okay, of course, these works would have been copied and circulated widely enough to be accessible to the writer of the Bamboo Annals. So, just to say that the source material rotted away, it's not enough. It's not good enough. That's where hypothesis number 2 comes in. Okay, so hypothesis number 1. the primary sources describing the Xia Dynasty rotted away. Because they were made of bamboo and bamboo rots. Hypothesis number 2. Okay? Less than a century after the composition of the Bamboo Annals, a psychopathic dictator named Qin Shi Huang you might remember him from my Lord of the Dings video. He's the guy who finally brought together the great dings of power, and he's the one who they fell into the river and were lost forever. No Gollum this time. Okay, and so Qin Shi Huang was this psychopathic dictator. Okay, and as part of his cult of personality, Qin Shi Huang decided to press the reset button on history and have everything begin with him. The atrocity that followed is called the burning of the books. The burning of books and burying of scholars. So, poor scholars. The atrocity that followed was known as the burning of the books and the burying of scholars. Okay? And any written documents that mentioned history prior to Qin Shi Huang was outlawed and destroyed. Meanwhile, the intelligentsia was rounded up and killed. Kind of like another, more recent fiasco in Chinese history. Ironically, the reason that we have texts like the Annals today is because Qin Shi Huang kept a personal library that he conveniently forgot to barbecue. Evidently, this library included the Bamboo Annals, but the sources used thereby were not included. So we have the Bamboo Annals, but not the sources for the Bamboo Annals. So that gets rid of our primary Xia source documents. Hypothesis number 3, okay, is that the written material of the Arlito culture, or the Xia Dynasty, did exist, but at some point in the intervening 4,000 years, it was found, ground up, and used as medicine. Let me explain. The reason that we have documentary evidence of the Shang Dynasty, remember the Xia was succeeded by the Shang, okay? So we have documentary evidence of the Shang Dynasty because during the Middle Shang period, a new technique emerged for recording information. Documents were engraved onto animal bones, which of course last a lot longer than bamboo slips. However, this was a relatively late development, and so no examples of pre-Shang oracle bone inscriptions have been identified. But we only say that this appears to be a late development because we haven't found any yet from an earlier period. So it doesn't mean that they weren't there. So, oracle bones? Just because we think it was a late development doesn't mean that it was a late development. There may have existed earlier oracle bones, okay? And that's what we call these bones with the writing on them, okay? But the problem is that farmers in Henan province have been digging up these inscribed bones for centuries, but it wasn't until recently that they were recognized as being written documents. Prior to that, people were kind of dumbfounded. They didn't know what to make of these mysterious bones covered in cool symbols, so they decided that they were dragon bones. And what do you do when you find a dragon bone? Well, that's a stupid question. Obviously, you grind it up and use it as medicine to treat malaria. What else would you do? It wasn't until the early 20th century that anyone realized that these cool symbols on the bones were actually writing. Indeed, an early form of written Chinese directly ancestral to the Hanzi of today. But it was too late. we will never know how much ancient knowledge has been lost, what secrets will remain forever hidden, all because some pharmacist wanted to make a quick buck. Perhaps on one of those bones that was ground up and destroyed was evidence for the Xia Dynasty, but someone unwittingly used it to treat malaria, rather than its intended purpose of revolutionizing Chinese historiography. So, oh well. So, what happens to the documentary evidence of the Arlito culture, aka the Xia Dynasty? Was the Arlito culture even the Xia Dynasty? Would it later be extrapolated to be the Xia Dynasty? What do you think? Personally, I remain optimistic that someday concrete proof will be unearthed linking the Arlito culture to the Xia Dynasty. Okay, that's what I think. And I'd love to hear what you think too. So that's it for today. Thanks for joining me. Up next, Origins of Chinese Civilization, Part 5, The Rise of the Shang Dynasty. See you next time.